recorded, and the recording will be made available via our YouTube channel after the event. Also, every participant will receive a certificate of attendance. Please submit any questions you have in the chat box, and we will answer these at the end of the session. I'm very happy to hand over to Liz, who is going to tell us about how to best prepare for online interviews in English. Thank you, Liz. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this. I'm keeping an eye on the chat box to see where everyone's from. This is very exciting. I'm speaking to you from Austin, Texas, in the US, and my job at Pearson is over a group that focuses on learning, research, and design, sort of embedding those best practices of what we know about how people learn in products that we make. But my specialty within that is on what we call personal and social capabilities, which has a lot to do with transferable skills, which has a lot to do with employability. So this is why I was so excited to be able to do this session. So today we're going to talk about interview anxiety and how we can help our students, our learners, best prepare for those interviews in English. And Charlie can go ahead and advance. I'm distracted because it's midnight in the Philippines. I'm so sorry, and also so impressed that you're joining this session. So here's what we're going to talk about today. That interviews are stressful. I want to spend a second or two just acknowledging that. But there are ways to reduce that stress, right? Knowledge and practice and many things in life help reduce stress. There are some basic interview basics, no matter whether it's online or in person. I want to go over those very quickly because I don't want to assume that our learners would know them all just naturally. And then talk a little bit more about what this looks like in online interviews. What are some things that can help make a difference, and how can we help prepare students and help them be less stressed about this? So Charlie, go ahead to the next slide. All right. I think the first thing to acknowledge with anyone is that interviews are stressful. There's usually something at stake, right? You want a position or a job. It's also really hard not to focus on the negative. The outcome of an interview can be that you don't get it. So it's hard to stop those thoughts of, if I mess up, I'll never get this. So I think it's really important, if you're talking to your adult students, older students, helping them for preparing for interviews, to just right away acknowledge there is stress involved. And also say, but there are things you can do to prepare that will reduce that stress. So the messaging that it's not something you don't have control over. You do have some control over it. And we're going to talk about some ways you can help anyone feel like it's a position, something they can control. And I think, like with stress, whether it's interviews or no stress, knowing that you have some agency, some control, helps lower your stress. So just to keep that kind of mindset is important. Okay, Charlie, you can go next one. All right. These are sort of basic, but I wouldn't want anyone to assume that someone applying for their first job or having even, an interview for an internship or a special program knows this. So really important to just make sure everyone knows how you approach preparing for an interview. So always you do as much research as you can, company or business, right? What can you find out about them? Learn about the interview itself, right? Is it going to be with one person? Is it going to be with a panel? Are they going to ask you to do something during the interview? Just encourage learners to find out as much information as they can. Anything they know about the position. And it could be an internship or it could be a job, but like what can they find out either from the job description itself, any information they have. Make sure they study it like it's, like this is information for them and they should really pay close attention to it. One thing we see in interviews, especially in the last couple of years, that there are some common questions, right? And I'm sure a lot of people on this call have participated in interviews. There's questions about the work, but then people are asking a lot more in behavioral questions these days, and you may have experienced these, right? So tell me about a time you faced a challenge in the workplace. Tell me something about yourself that isn't on your resume. So these, you can't know the question that someone's going to ask, but you can certainly like take a chance to encourage students to explore like what would be some common questions and how would they answer them. The other thing that a lot of times people maybe don't think of is you should have your own questions for the interviews, right? You should come, it's not urging students to think like what's a really good question for their interviewer and craft that question is an important thing you can do to just prepare. And this last one is sort of my twist, my special twist. I don't know if this comes up. If I say softer or transferable skills in the chat box, tell me what you think of when you see softer skills or transferable skills. What could those mean? Everyone's still saying, yep. Skills for life, ability to work in a team, future skills, flexibility, awesome. Communication, self-management, yay, Claudia from I'm not sure where. Yes, problem, all of these, right? So critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, all of those are skills that we say they transfer because we know interpersonal skills is another good one, right? They don't have to do with your knowledge about the work. They have to do with how good you're going to be working individually and on a team. And these are those skills you take with you no matter what the job. And what we see, employers are increasingly aware that those are as equally important as someone's experience. So what I would also make sure is when a student is preparing for an interview, they spend some time thinking about how they could showcase or communicate that they're good at teamwork or that they are really creative. Because that might not come out in a resume and it might not come out in the answer. Can everyone hear me? I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, good. So that's another, it's a basic for preparing, but it's a really important one. And I think it would give anyone a bit of an edge in an interview because employers, people are looking to see if someone have these skills that they can't necessarily develop and train in someone, right? You may know how to program, or you may have skills related to the job, but equally important is, can you work well in a team? Are you good at communicating? Do you think logically? So that's my tip on basics. And Charlie, go to the next one. Okay. We've seen, and you have all probably seen this too, a little bit of a shift to online interviews. It was happening already, sending a recording of yourself, maybe answering some questions. With the pandemic, like everything else, all interviews have moved online, right? So, but just like in-person interviews, there are tips and techniques very specific to interviewing online. And that's what I'm going to spend the next piece talking about. And you can go to the next slide, Charlie. So there are, we've all learned this, and you may have learned it in Zoom calls with your family or in your work situation. These are all things that we've spent the last couple of months just realizing. And I'm going to go over them because I want to go over the solutions for them in an online interview situation. So nonverbal cues are much harder to read. You don't have all of the body language that you can sort of pick up on. You have people's head, maybe their hands. If they're like me, they talk with their hands. But you don't have as many nonverbal cues to pick up on. Also, we all know active listening, demonstrating that you're actively listening to someone in person. That would involve, like making a noise, right? Saying, oh, yes, I agree. Just little words that you might insert in person in conversation to show I'm listening to what you're saying. Well, we know on video that if I say, oh, I agree, that it's probably going to mute the mic of the person who's talking. So it's really important to sort of be aware of the dynamics of even audio on video. And we'll talk a little bit about that. There are these strange delays. We've all had them. You wait for someone to be done. You think they're done. You start talking. They start talking at the same time. I mean, it's sort of it's funny now. It was funny maybe in March and April, and now it stopped being funny, but we've all seen it, which means there's this greater chance of interrupting each other, which in an interview, if you're being interviewed, you do not want to be seen as interrupting the person who's asking you a question. And then there's so many articles out there. I'm not even going to spend time on this, but I would just say important for your students to understand that camera setup, background, lighting, audio, internet connections, all these things are actually really important. I have a strange background today because my husband's in the front room, but we also get used to, we've all gotten a little bit used to being in each other's kitchens and living rooms and other places. So let's move on a little bit to what we can do to help with this mindset. And you can go to the next slide, Charlie. Okay. I found this picture and I was really happy because I was trying to think, what would it look like to illustrate this? So one thing that maybe you could do to help students sort of shift their mindset is, however you would want to do it, think about, like, if you come to someone in person, what's the first thing you do? If you're meeting someone back in the day when we used to meet in person, you're showing up for your interview, the first thing you're going to do is shake hands, right? Well, what does shaking hands look like over video? What does it look like to shake hands, right? What's the equivalent of shaking hands? Okay, I'm seeing smile, wave. Yep. I'm waiting for a few more. Nod was the one I was waiting for, whoever put that one. Yeah, so remind people, like, you do have those few moments before everyone gets settled, and it is an opportunity to connect with the people who are going to interview with you. So think, like, there is a little nod and a little hi. You can't physically shake hands with them, but you can smile, which always shows warmth and openness. Establish that connection. You could high five. I hadn't thought about that one. Eye contact is important in video, so you just want to make sure everyone knows, have their camera sort of at eye level. So you don't want to be looking down, and you don't want to be looking at a monitor off to the side. But maybe just have a little bit of brainstorming with students, like, what will they do that will be like shaking hands if they're in an interview? And if they're thinking about it that way, they're certainly going to help shift their mindset to, okay, online interview, what are some things I can do? Yes, eye contact. I agree with whoever put that. Eye contact is crucial. Other things that are important, posture, which I have horrible posture, and I actually have a really bad chair right now. But I've heard some people say if you sit on the edge of your seat, that helps you, on video, set up straight. We've all gotten a little bit slouchy, I have, from being on calls all day. But, think like smile. People say when you smile, it actually like improves your mood. And I think when you think about your posture, it also puts you in a bit of a professional mind frame. So encourage good posture for the interviews. Even if people can't see your whole body, they sort of see that you're sitting up straight and that you're like taking this interaction seriously. Yes, and so someone was putting in the chat body language, and think about like you only have body language from this part, right? So your shoulders, looking ahead, being attentive. I wouldn't do this, right? So just think about with your students, like have them share with you like what they think are the ways you need to look on a video call to show that you're listening. Eye contact's another one. I say smile early, often. Smile early and often, because smiling is the best way to sort of communicate warmth on video calls. Yeah, I see someone be careful with hand movements. It's true. I have to like put my hands in my lap sometimes so that I don't wave them around too much. Charlie, you can go to the next slide, I think. So if you've got someone who's going to be in an online video, I would, any way you can, try and arrange or encourage them to practice an interview online with someone. It can be with you, it can be with another student. They can record. All these video platforms often have a record feature, so they could take some example questions, just pretend questions, and practice answering them online. But getting used to the back and forth online, which those of us who, as part of our job are remote workers, right? And we do this all day. Don't assume that students do it all day. They might do it on a video call with a friend, but that's very different than a professional setting. And some of these we were talking about in the chat, but so a couple of things that if you give them the opportunity to practice and talk about what they did or realize they did it, I think will also help build that confidence, which is one of those things that's going to lower stress, right? If you're feeling like you've had a chance to do it, you feel a little more confident, and then you're not quite as stressed. So that's really what we're going for here, right? Enough tools and techniques and tips so that people can feel confident and not be as stressed as they would be otherwise. So think about how do you show engagement? And all you've got in a video call is your face, right? So we've said nodding, we've said smiling, like listening intently, anything that can convey like they're very engaged. You may even need to practice that, right? So that it comes across the right way. We talked about this, looking at the camera, not looking down at the faces in the screen. Anything that shows verbal acknowledgement, but doesn't interrupt. So that's the trickiest thing for me on these big calls that I'm sure we've all been on, is you want to say, I agree. But if you say it, it cuts off the mic of the person that's talking. And then you're stuck in that awkward loop of, no, you go. No, I'm done talking. You go. And then it goes on a couple of times, right? So nodding is perfect. Making noises, which we often do to acknowledge agreement or acknowledge I heard. You've got to train yourself out of that for a video call. Because if you do it, you're going to mess up there's going to be even more delays and more of those embarrassing circular things. Another way to show engagement is to ask a clarifying question. It's a basic technique in person or on video, but it almost becomes a bit more important on video because the people who are interviewing you don't have as much information like body language to know that you're really engaged. So I would encourage students to, think about a time in an interview, practice with you how you can say like, oh, I was listening to that thing you just said. I'd like to ask you a quick question because I want to clarify something, right? The clarifying questions aren't just showing, they're usually just showing that you're listening, but on video, they're also showing like how engaged you are. It's another opportunity to show engagement. We've all learned this. There are delays because of internet. So there are two things I would say that can help with that. One, just pause a little bit before answering. And if someone's not used to doing a lot of video calls, they may need a little practice on this. One tip is like if you keep yourself muted and it's time to speak, just the act of unmuting gives you that extra beat. So you've made yourself a safe, you've built in that time just because you've got to unmute in order to speak. And often that 1 second is the 1 second that's going to keep those weird delays from messing up the conversation. The other thing that I think you can help students do is practice how to signal when your answer is complete. So if I'm an interviewer, I ask a question, I'm the interviewee, I answer the question, and there's always going to be this moment, and you know this from video calls, where you're not sure if the person's done speaking. And finishing your answer with a sentence, like a strong closing sentence, is a really great way to make it really clear, I'm done speaking, you can ask me another question. So just practicing, like, what's the thing you can say that would communicate that you're done with your answer, right? And it might be something like, wrapping up. So in summary, like, this is the most important thing, right? Rephrasing the question, saying, okay, I think that's, I hope that answers your question. Phrases like that. Oh, someone wrote the same thing I was thinking at the exact same moment. Sheila. Yay, Sheila. I hope that answers your question. Clearly signals, and I'm done answering this question. So you don't get, again, stuck in that weird video interrupting. Let's see. I think let's go to that very next one. So someone said earlier in the thread that they think that online interviews actually can give you an advantage. And I agree, because in an online interview, you can set up your space out of camera with, things taped to the wall. Notes. Now, you don't want them to be little tiny notes that they're going to be trying to read, but I always, for really important phone calls now on videos, I just put up some reminders to myself of something like I really want to get out of the call, or just little, I don't even know, like I put up a big Post-it the other day that said, listen, because I felt like recently I had been talking too much and I wasn't listening enough. I couldn't do that in an office. I couldn't have someone come into my office, sit down, and see this big Post-it that says, listen. But on an interview, you can give yourself reminders. So I think it's maybe a nice exercise to talk to your students about, okay, if you had to think of 3 things that you want to keep in mind for this interview, and it might be stay calm, it might be don't interrupt, or it might be, remember to mention your experience with X, right? But on an interview call, you can give yourself these reminders and little helping bits that you can't in person. So I think it's a great exercise to say, well, what were 3 things that you would like to remind yourself during the call, and think about those and write them out. Yes, and some people have 2 monitors, and they can keep their notes up there, but you just want to be really careful that no one thinks you're looking at your other monitor during the interview, right? So I put things behind the screen so it looks like I'm still looking at the camera, but they're up on the wall. Yes, why these it's hard to say what specifically applies to an online interview, but I think some of these are very specific to online interviews in our new world. Okay, let's go to the final part, and then I think if I time this correctly, we'll have a good amount of time for some questions. So Charlie, you can go to that very last slide. If we go back to the beginning and we think about how interviews are stressful, and you doing something online has its own stress to it, I think it's really important for people to remember, unlike an in-person interview, you don't have the small talk before the interview and the small talk afterwards. I mean, I think back to all the interviews I've been on, and you shake hands, you have a little chit chat, you come into a room, you sit down, interview's done, you get up and you say goodbye, maybe say like, oh, how are you getting home? Like all that little talk. Those are all things that are building rapport with the person who interviewed you. So in the in-person world, you have a lot of chances to make a connection with the people interviewing you. Online, you do not. Online, it is absolutely just the video call. That is your one chance to have this connection. So thinking about it that way also means like think of how many ways you can make it expressed for you, like that you're personable, that you have a personality, right? What are your opportunities within the call to have something that's a conversation? So I would encourage students to think of how the video interview is like a conversation. They want some back and forth. They want some opportunity. Anytime you can build rapport, that's the key to a video interview, because there is no before and after, right? There is just the call. It's our world these days. So talking to students about like, what would you do, to show your personality in the call? How would you build relationships with someone in between the questions, or like before the call, at the beginning, at the end of the call? So those are my tips and techniques for, I hope, helping reduce anxiety for your students who are you're going to help get ready for these interviews online, which is a different world, but it's where we are right now. So why don't Nikki and Charlie, are people been typing questions in the box? How do you handle this part?
Ask a specific question. Let's see if we can answer it.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the chat. So if you have a question for me, I will give it my best shot. Mostly what I'm seeing, I will say, is even more useful tips being shared in the box. It's true, like glasses have a glare. And I've noticed I can tell when someone's on a call and they're just on like checking Facebook instead of watching the call. So it is important to realize if you wear glasses that there is a reflection. All right, so I see one. What questions, I think it said, what questions could a student prepare for an interviewer? I would look at the job description that they're applied for and think of something that's not covered. So have them do the work to say like, okay, well, what's a question you have that wouldn't be answered by the way this job is described? And that shows that they did their research, they're really interested, and they're smart enough to figure out what wasn't said. That would be like a great way to just come up with one question. What should be seen on the background during a video call? Well, this I've read, you don't want it to look like a mug shot, right? So you don't have a completely blank wall, but you also don't want it to look too busy, like, you know, you're in some catalog shot. I think my background today is a little busy, but I think it's more important to be the right distance from the camera, honestly. Not too far away and not like super close. So, like, pick something that shows and make sure your lights don't go off in the middle of your call. And people can also use virtual backgrounds for sure. Have I missed any questions? Because they're rolling pretty fast.
Can you hear me now, Liz? I think my mic was a bit slow earlier. Fantastic. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I was still trying to sort that. I'm not sure if you caught the one about what questions should a student ask an interviewer.
Yes, I was saying to that one that I think a good strategy for that is to really go over the job description. And identify something that's not described, that's important to know, you know, and pick a question that says, you know, you mentioned this in the description. I'd like to know more about it. You know, does it involve, I think it must involve doing this, but can you tell me more about that? So something that shows you were paying attention to how the job was described. Other questions like, where do you see yourself in a few years, right? Can tell you a lot about the company and the person you're interviewing with. So there are a lot of ways to approach it, but having a question prepared in advance, I think, is a really good strategy.
Absolutely. We've had a comment here being that the problem is the private space as well. There's lots of noisy family members and no possibility to have a well-organized interview room. But my response to that would just be that we're all in the same situation. We're all aware that we're having to work at home. This is unprecedented times. So you've just got to crack on with it. And if you've got a dog barking or you've got builders' noises in the background or family members walking around, that's just the case. And as long as you can continue having that discussion with the interviewer, the interviewee, that's what's important. It doesn't really matter if you have some distractions, because that even happens in a work environment as well.
Yep, I agree. I think it's more important how you handle them when they happen. So
exactly.
Trying to eliminate as much as possible as the first part. But when the dog comes in or the kid screams or you hear the garbage truck outside, just being able to say, oh, I can't believe it's, you know, the garbage truck is right outside this window. I'm so sorry. I'm going to put myself on mute. People understand now. I mean, that's something that's come out of this. Everyone's experienced it.
Yeah,
and
it's an opportunity to just demonstrate your problem solving. And the way
you don't get frazzled. You know, I think that's, if you think about what an interviewer is looking for, they're looking to see how you handle not the normal things, but the things that aren't normal. And so even though it's a small thing like a dog running into your room, they want to know that you're not going to like be panic and then, you know, like get really, really upset, that you can just sort of handle that. So I've
got two questions that came in earlier. One is around using emoticons. Should you or shouldn't you?
I would say for the no. Not unless you happen to know that, or if they use them first, right? I would look to see what I would think. I would treat the interview as like the most professional interaction, and then wait for information about how informal it can be. But I would not lead with the informal part.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think no text speak either. No lols. The other question was around salary, actually. Should people ask about salary or not?
That one comes up all the time. I don't know that I'm the right, I personally think that's a really important piece of information. Now, a lot of times interviews, a person before you have the interview may have asked you what your salary range is. So I depends. Like just can you tell me the range for this if it hasn't been revealed? I think is a very fair question. I think I have my own opinion
you're there
about
for a reason. You're
Yeah.
there to earn an income, so you need to establish whether this job is going to provide you with that. But again, it's the same with the emoticons. Don't lead with it, but follow up with it.
Yeah, you can follow up with it, but it's. I would say that, well, this is, everyone will say like women are paid less than men, and it's because they're less comfortable asking about salary. It's, that there's research on that. So it's not like it's not that it's wrong to ask about it. So don't think of it as this topic that's not allowed, because like you said, Charlie, like there's a reason you want the job, and it has to do with being paid for the job.
So there's one more question. Sheila. So Sheila's asked, it's quite a long, so it's thinking of what you said earlier about interviewing online, and it's the only chance to make an impression or connection. Is there anything in particular you would suggest the students should say at the start of the interview in a friendly way?
Oh, I think the usual, but it's worth saying, before we get started, I would just like to thank you again for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. It doesn't ever hurt to thank people up front for the time, or just, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I have so many questions for you, and there's so much I want to tell you about myself. You don't have to go overboard, but I don't think it doesn't ever hurt to just form a connection right from the very beginning.
Absolutely. We've had another question here, and it's the age-old interview dreaded question. In what are your weaknesses? So Yaroslav,
what
would be a mild way to formulate your shortcomings? Of course, we all want to say, well, I work too hard.
I just care too much. I care too much about my job. I always like to say that I know this is an area I need to work on. So when you say that you're saying, I know that I have a weakness here, but you're also saying I'm aware of it and I'm actively, intentionally trying to do something about it. So I might say, so many to choose from, but I'm working on, being more confident in my opinion, right? And I'm just trying to like really, be better about sharing my opinion and having confidence that I have something to say. Well, that's not the worst thing in the world, but it shows that I have reflection on that. So anything that shows self-reflection, I think is a great way to couch, to like sneak in like, oh yeah, I'm not so great at this, but don't say it like that. Say it as you're aware of it and the things that you're doing to try and improve it.
And there you go. Sheila's added to that. Be aware of your weaknesses and show that you're addressing this weakness or the problem.
Yep, I agree with that. It's just if you're going to speak about a weakness, speak about it in the terms of like showing your self-awareness of it. Okay, I don't know this question about the webinar or the other time. I'm not sure about that one.
So Tatiana, you're asking, after the webinar on another time, where? What question is it, please, Tatiana? Let's have it again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's scrolling very fast for me, so I don't.
Yes, we might have missed it there. I'm going to have a quick scroll, but Tatiana, if you don't mind repeating that in the chat box. I'm scrolling up. I can't see anything now. But it's great to see this engagement. Thank you so much, guys. Lots of great comments from you all here.
There are a lot of great tips in here. This is the bonus tips coming up here.
Yeah, the extra features. Mm-hmm. The extra features, exactly. Okay, Tatiana, we're not getting that question from you, but I'll have a dig through the chat after we end the session, and I'll try and get an email response to you. So I think we're just running at time now, Liz. So Liz, thank you so much for putting together the slide.
My
During the
pleasure.
session. As Ari says here, you're an incredible communicator, so thank you for that. And thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day and joining us here in today's session. Certificates will be sent out. A recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and please look out for the virtual goodie bag that will be sent to you after the session. We do hope to see you at another webinar as part of the series. I've just pinned the URL for that in the chat box, so we hope to see you there. Thanks very much. Stay safe and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all so much. Stay safe. Take care.